First, thank you so much for looking at some of my longer form rare book video content here on YouTube. I know some people have asked me to continue making these longer form videos, and I'm happy to oblige, of course. Sometimes there's a delay as a lot of things get in the way. And in the meantime, you can look at my shorter form content, of course, on Instagram at Rare Book Buyer, or even through the shorts on the YouTube platform itself if you subscribe. So I thought I would talk about 2024 as we approach the new year, which gives me, as well as many people, I would say, time to pause and reflect, especially on the resilience of people and humans in general through various vicissitudes and hardships they have endured, and to emerge, as the old adage says, on the other side, stronger for having gone through it. Of course, we would have preferred the strength during the vicissitudes, rather than philosophical reflection afterwards. But nevertheless, a lovely phrase. When I think about the passage of time, I think about our fellow companions that have come along with us. And in that regard, of course, I'm thinking about books, because books as physical objects, like fragile, mortal humans, are remarkable survivors. They have survive the ravages of time, whether they've been floods or famine or war, or even the careless handling of a bookseller at a book fair. And at least for me, they are distinct from other historical objects that have survived the ages. I'm thinking here of coins. You can hold in your hand a denarius of Julius Caesar, even a shilling, a hammered shilling of James I. And certainly those provide an incredible tangible connection to the past and insight into the historical period. But they, of course, have been found in the fields of farmers or at the bottom of the Thames. And in some ways, they have survived having been shielded by the ravages of time. And books are often not as lucky as they get passed from hand to hand and generation to generation and studied and sometimes mishandled. And not all books survive. Unfortunately, we have lost many great friends over the years, including, I would say, the great Book of Omar, that famous work bound by Sengorsky and Sutcliffe and covered in jewels, which met its fate at the bottom of the ocean when it sank with the Titanic in 1912. Other books on the other side of the spectrum, of course, have survived remarkably, and I'm thinking here, let's say, of the Book of Kells, which you can visit at Trinity College today, the famous manuscript which somehow, perhaps in the Abbey of Kells, withstood the pillaging of the Vikings somehow. And one of the things I love about book selling and rare books in general is that we get to tell these stories, because books as physical objects, of course, having endured the centuries, carry with them wear and tear and various physical attributes that tell their stories, whether they're lost pages or annotations or provenance. And we get to ferret out those stories and tell the story of the uniqueness of a particular copy of a book. So I'm going to show you 3 books here which I consider absolutely remarkable examples of surviving the centuries as we go into a new year. The first one is a rather massive book from the 13th century, and of course it's not a book necessarily, since it's long before the advent of movable type in Europe. It is a manuscript. And can you imagine something that has survived 750 years or so and what it has endured? All the more so because this is an Armenian manuscript, so it had to survive the Armenian genocide and the systematic destruction under the Ottomans of Armenian cultural heritage. And there were, of course, many people during the period, scholars and Russians and Armenians and others, that worked tirelessly to preserve and protect such objects of obvious cultural importance to the Armenian people. And this particular book, along with a horde of other Armenian manuscripts, was taken out of Russian-occupied Anatolia and brought to Tbilisi in Georgia before 1918. The book itself is the work of Sargis Shorhale, a famous Armenian theologian, poet, philosopher. And luckily, in 1918, there was a great scholar by the name of Robert Pierpont Blake, who was extraordinarily proficient in Armenian and Georgian. He had studied, was a professor at the University of St. Petersburg before leaving to Georgia before the onset of the Russian Revolution. And there he met the man that had collected and preserved and saved all of these important Armenian manuscripts. And he worked very hard, tirelessly to catalog and to identify them, and eventually to have them sold to Harvard and to the British Library, and therefore the manuscripts were preserved and studied. He received this particular manuscript for his diligent efforts as a commission for the sale. And all of that's related in a typescript that I was given with the book. And one of the wonderful tidbits in the typescript is that his wife, Nadia, during the period, was more thrilled to have him have received this particular manuscript as a commission than money with which to buy an engagement ring for her. In the 1920s, he became a professor at Harvard University in Byzantine studies and really promoted the field. And this manuscript was actually on loan to Harvard in the 20s before it was taken back into his personal possession as a treasured object. Now, I've only given it very cursory attention here. It's really just an overview because I myself have not poured my heart and soul yet into its study and research because I am getting ready for the New York Antiquarian Book Fair that comes in April, and I hope to have it fully cataloged and studied by then so I can present it to a curator and hopefully have it purchased by an appropriate university library where it will be preserved. So that is Remarkable Survivor number 1. Book number 2, Remarkable Survivor, is this wonderfully bound volume here. It's printed in 1581, and it's known as the Ostrog Bible, so a Bible of great importance, especially of Ukrainian heritage. It's actually the first printed Bible in Church Slavonic, so a monument of typography, if you can imagine how difficult it was to print in Slavonic during the period. And if you look at the initial letters particularly, which I love, and compare them to their European counterparts, you can see how remarkably different they are. It was printed by Ivan Fyodorov, a very famous printer during the period, under the patronage, believe it or not, of Ivan the Terrible. So I guess at least in that aspect, he couldn't have been too terrible if he was a patron of the printing arts. And this is just a truly remarkable book for many aspects. In many ways, it's akin to the Lutheran Bible that really cemented the German language, because this book actually is responsible for the dissemination and the systemization of Church Slavonic. And in many ways, it's even akin to the Gutenberg Bible, because just like the Gutenberg Bible that was so important for bridging the transition between manuscript traditions and the printed text, in the Slavic countries where printing came later, in this example, 130 years later, of course, it was equally responsible for bridging that same transition between manuscripts and printing in the future. And this book did not survive the centuries entirely unscathed. Remarkably, it's missing a few pages in the front, but interestingly, those were replaced at a very early date, possibly in the 1700s or so, in an absolute expert hand, making it even more interesting to me in some respects. And how it continued to survive even through possibly the Russian Revolution is truly remarkable. So that is Remarkable book number 2. Again, just a cursory overview of it, and I hope to have that ready for the New York Book Fair in March. And finally, a true treasure here, and this one is extraordinarily rare. This was printed in 1743 in Georgian, and it's the first time the Bible was printed in the Georgian language. So another remarkable monument to typography under the auspices of the Prince of Georgia at the time, during a period where Georgia really tried to assert its own cultural independence and therefore had a strong incentive to print the Bible in the Georgian language. And besides being an absolutely fascinating book, one of the reasons I say this is extremely rare and just a remarkable book to have survived is that nearly all the copies were destroyed. This was printed in Moscow. And when Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812 and during the famous burning of Moscow, almost every copy of this wonderful and famous book perished. So that is a true, remarkable story of survival. And then, of course, it had to continue on through the next 200 years. Again, I will be giving this a lot more detailed attention in the months ahead, but I just wanted to share with you these 3 wonderful books that have survived the centuries and will hopefully continue to survive like us for many years into the future. And I wish everybody a very happy 2024.